Greetings, YouTube. Let's talk about fantasy metals. Now, I think, pardon me, I think I've covered some of this ground before, but I've had a kind of a fresh perspective on it, so I thought I'd cover it again. And for any of the people here who are new, they may have never heard the discussion. So, we're going to imagine a world where the two oldest hominid races, the elves and the dwarves, exist. Humans haven't arrived yet, or if they have, they're considered minor players. And we're going to imagine that we are in the Neolithic era. So we're at the stone tool stage. And everybody is at the stone tool stage. We're going to start at that basic level. Yeah, I know that the dragons have probably been here for longer, but they're really not concerned in the least about what goes on amongst the two legs. So the first group to come up with copper tools is in dispute. The elves say they have done it, the dwarves say they did it. The dwarven defense of the position is that because they are dwellers in the earth, that they had more experience in mining, so they found the first copper deposits. The elves' position is that because most of their peoples were either nomadic or semi-nomadic, they were able to cover more of the planet and they were able to find more of the surface deposits. Now, the elves' position is that the dwarves, even though they claimed to have been great miners, were actually just cave dwellers. So they weren't actually doing a whole lot of mining. They were just living in things they found. And the dwarves' position is that elves wouldn't know a surface deposit if it bit them on their skinny asses. Much has been written about this amongst both the dwarves and the elves. Many arguments have been had, and occasionally a duel pops up. Academics can be very tenacious. But when it comes to the next stage, bronze weapons, as much as the elves may have be upset by this, even they have to admit it was the dwarves that invented bronze, which was a superior metal to copper. It became somewhat ubiquitous. Though the elves were somewhat loath to adopt it, they had to admit that it was superior to copper. But they were not willing to let that gauntlet lie on the ground, so they picked it up. And they countered the development of bronze with the development of edril. Yes, elves roll their R's. And edril is a metal which looks very similar to bronze. It's a slightly lighter color, but it is about a third as heavy and twice as strong. So it is much superior to standard bronze. And it became the elven metal and remains the elven metal. So if people think of elven technology, they are almost always discussing edril. It plays the role that steel plays amongst humans and dwarves for the most part. The elves just don't see any reason to change it. It works. It does what it's supposed to. It's a little bit heavier than steel, but it is an amorphous, non-ferrous metal. It weathers well. It can be sold to aquatic races easily. It's very popular amongst them. It is cast as opposed to work the same way that steel is, though there is hammering involved anyway, but just considerably less. And it just has a look that has become known and seen as characteristically elven. But the dwarves weren't going to let that sit. They would not tolerate the best metal in the world being invented by elves, so they came out with iron/steel, and the transition from iron to steel was so rapid that no one could snipe that from the dwarves. So steel is pretty much in the dwarven camp. Again, the elves were not going to let that gauntlet lie upon the ground, so they picked it up and they invented mithril. Again, they roll their R's. And that is a superior metal to steel. It's lighter, stronger. It is also an amorphous, non-ferrous metal, so it doesn't rust, it doesn't have a crystalline structure, but it's lighter and stronger than steel. It is often referred to as true silver because of its appearance. And again, the dwarves were upset by this. They didn't want the best metal in the world to have been invented by elves. So they invented adamantite, which currently holds the top slot as the best metal in the world. Yes, it's heavy and it's black, but Even the elves have to admit that there are times when having something made from it is appropriate. Um, and it has become identified with the dwarves to a very deep level. If you see an item made out of adamantite, you think dwarven. But lying on the ground is that adamantite gauntlet. So the elves are going to want to pick it up. What comes next? I know that there are many fantasy metals in the world. Both many have been put forth in D&D or Pathfinder, and many have existed in other games, and there are magical metals that have been discussed in historical myths and things like that. So let's come up. What's the next stage? What is the next thing invented by the elves as a counter to the dwarves' adamantite? Now, because the elves prefer lighter items to heavier, we could say that they develop a form of adamantite that which is less weight, but not without losing any of the strength. We could argue that maybe adamantite is the top tier as far as hardness and durability is concerned, or you can decide to go higher than that if you want. That's fine. But I think there could be an argument for saying that adamantite is the top. It doesn't get any better. Pardon me. So what do the elves do? Is it just the lightning? Or do they do something else? They change the color, the presentation. How do they put their elven thumbprint, if you will, their fingerprints on adamantite to make it theirs? And to show up the dwarves, of course, who will then feel compelled to try to outdo them as well. Or have we gotten to the point of diminishing gains? Where yes, there could be minor improvements made to adamantite, but they may be so small that only academics are ever going to notice the difference, and your average person, even your average dwarf, is not going to care that someone has made a weapon out of adamantite version 1.1 as opposed to 1.0. So have you used something that's superior to adamantite in your campaigns? Who invented it? Is it extraterrestrial? I know I have used crystal structures in games where the crystal had an odd number of facets because the even number, the last facet, was actually in another dimension, making the crystal indestructible because it bridged the gap between two dimensions. So you couldn't destroy it in either dimension without destroying it simultaneously in both dimensions. And since it would be almost impossible to do that, the item was in question was indestructible. But it only made points, so you can make stabby things with it, and you couldn't make anything else with it. So it could be used in arrows or bolts or spears, and in fact I had them used in firearms because this was a Game World campaign, but they could be used in rounds as well, making the ultimate armor-piercing round for a firearm. So let's talk about what's the next step after adamantite. What do we do if we do anything at all? And what are the dwarves going to do about it?